Cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around for this one. I'm surprised to see so many people, actually. I thought you'd all have gone off to the pub or something by now. Anyway, I've been asked here today to talk about the very lucky story I've had with the games that I've made, and then identify some of the key lessons that I think are important to a game which wants to combine being having a social impact, educating people, whilst also being commercially successful. These are very personal things that have happened to me, so your use of them may vary, but hopefully you'll find them interesting. So I founded Ndemic Creations back in 2011, and I am the designer of the two games that we'll talk about in a moment, as well as doing all the random stuff that you have to do as a little indie developer. The two games that I've made, Plague Inc. and Rebel Inc., are both based on real-world issues. Has anyone here actually played Plague Inc. before? Can I see hands in the air? Ooh, that's a good number. And how about Rebel Inc., the new one? Oh, yeah, a few. My sister hasn't got her hand up for Rebel Inc. because she hasn't played it yet, being a bad sister. Anyway, so... Plague Inc., for people who don't know that, Plague Inc. is a game about infecting the world with a deadly disease. The player has to decide which disease they want to, and then we have we simulate how that disease spreads around the world, and the players are trying to kill everybody. It's not a very nice game, but we kind of have this top-down view of the world. This is your main view of the screen that you see, and as the player plays, they'll see their disease spreading around the world, and they'll choose to evolve new symptoms which increase certain aspects of the disease. And then as the game goes on, the world will notice what's happening. They'll try to take actions to slow your disease and try and cure it. So that's Plague Inc. That's the first game I made. And then my more recent one is Rebel Inc., which is an insurgency simulator. Here, the player it's heavily inspired by events in Afghanistan. And the player is trying to stabilize a heavily war-torn region. And so you'll see that here's an example of a region, and the players have to balance civilian and military priorities. They have to decide, well, we really need to roll out new water sources for people over here, but at the same time we've got this insurgency happening, and we need to deploy a load of new soldiers. Which way are we going to go? And with Rebel Inc., it's a lot about difficult decisions. It's trying to help people understand why the situation in Afghanistan, why we've seen similar things in Syria, in Iraq, why it's so complicated, and just make people think about it a little bit more. And the interplay between the civilian and military stuff is something which I worked really quite hard on, having it so that people, it's not a fighting game, but it's also not just a development game. You've got to have this play between the two of them. So, as Suzanne's already stolen my thunder on it, we've got over 120 million people who've played our games. That's a ridiculous number, to be honest. I mean, I can't really comprehend what that means, but every day around 50 to 60,000 people get our games each day. So the games that we make have got a real niche. Like, people want to play these kind of games that actually require a bit of intelligence, a bit of thinking. There's a clear appetite for them. The numbers aren't on the scale of some of the really big guys. We are still that sort of small niche player, but the games are popular. People enjoy playing them. So I'll just give you a bit of background about how I originally made Plague Inc. The little spreadsheet up in the top corner is the very first version of Plague Inc. I made. I used to be a management consultant at Accenture, and I wanted to do something a little bit different, a bit entrepreneurial. I tried to think of something entrepreneurial that I could do. All my ideas were shit, so I thought, all right, well, in the meantime, I'm going to try making a game. I like playing games. I want to see how it would go. So after a lot of thinking about different ideas, I decided to make Plague Inc. And I made this Excel spreadsheet first to just see if I could actually create the algorithms that I would need to be able to model the spread of infectious disease. So you can see we've got North and South America, we've got Europe and very tiny sort of Africa, Middle East, we've got Asia on the right-hand side. And it's incredibly basic, but it just gave me the confidence that, yes, actually, even though I haven't got that game industry experience, I can make something which could potentially turn into a game. However, I had no programming experience, and I had the artistic abilities of a dead slug. So I couldn't do it on my own. And this is where I was very lucky. I searched and I found a few contractors around the world who were able to help me with the heavy programming. So I found Mario, my original tech guy, and the way I always describe it to people is he built me a sand pit. I went into the sand pit and built a sand castle. And we sell the sand castle. The game is the sand castle. But I could never have made my sand castle without the sand pit or game engine that he built me. So within the game engine, I was there doing very slow balancing and creating of algorithms and code. And it took about a year to make Plague Inc., and it would cost about $5,000 to make. I was basically doing it in evenings and weekends and cramming it into spare time. And as anyone who's made a game will know, there's all sorts of shit, and you've got, oh, it's gone wrong, and you've got to try and change it, and it's not fun enough, and you've got to balance it, and you've got to tweak it. And I think with my algorithmic games in particular, it's all about iteration. You've got to keep on tweaking and fine-tuning and trying to find the fun, make sure it's communicating the things that you want it to communicate, that it's feeling real enough. And we'll talk more about realism in game design in a little bit. But yeah, after a year, I was able to release it, and it released in May 2012, and I pushed it out while I was on holiday, didn't tell anyone about the game, and a few hours later, we had thousands of people playing the game, and a few days later, it was at the top of the charts, where it's pretty much stayed ever since. So we've had 7 years of being at the top of the iPhone charts, which again is ridiculous and not something we can take for granted. Maybe tomorrow, I have to assume it will die tomorrow, but it hasn't done it yet. And yeah, it was completely surreal seeing Plague Inc. grow like that. I was able to turn it. Took some time off from my job, expecting it was going to die, and then it didn't die. So eventually I quit my job, and I then started trying to grow more of a company around it. I thought, right, I'm going to get an office, so I am forced to put trousers on every day, or pants as you guys call it, and actually get out of the house, because I was just working from my flat at that point. And we've very slowly grown the company up around Plague Inc. And one of the key things that we've been doing in the last 7 years is we've been updating the game. When Plague Inc. came out, games as a service wasn't really a particularly sort of thing that everyone thought, people didn't think it was that important. But for us, I saw Plague Inc. after 3 months of being at the top of the charts back in 2012, the game began to taper off and began to start going down the charts. And that's when I released my first major content update, which was a mind-controlling brain parasite, and so people could buy it as an expansion pack. And that attention brought us back up the charts again. And since then, every time we release another update, we see it kind of keeping us going at the top of the charts even longer. And so we've done tie-ins with Fox and one of the Planet of the Apes movies. So we put the simian flu in, which was pretty cool. I've done the vampire-based disease. We've done a multiplayer update. And then a really big one for us has been a scenario creator, which lets people access the algorithms and the models that we've created, and they can create their own diseases and their own interactions on how governments might respond. So we see lots of realistic diseases. And we also see we've got a plague of fridges, we've got a kitten disease, you have sort of memes and whatever, various, your favorite YouTuber, all of these things people can create in the game and then share with everyone around the world. And again, these are all things which just keep the game going. Updating Plague Inc. is the key reason why it's still around and why I'm still here with you guys today. And I also wanted to spread the game around as much as possible. I'd spent a year of my life sweating blood and tears to try and make a game. And once I'd made it, I wanted to make sure I was sharing it with as many people as possible. So localization was a key thing for us. We've got around 50,000 words in the game, so it doesn't come cheap, but we've now got it localized in 11 major languages, and everywhere we localize it, it goes to the top of the charts there. So China's actually our second biggest market these days, South Korea, Japan, all the European countries. Disease is a universal human constant. So it's actually the game, purely by chance, I made a game that localizes very well. Everybody understands illness. You don't have to change it to fit different cultures. And so localizing has really been a great way of getting it into the hands of a lot of other people. And I also decided I wanted to put it on PC and make it into a bigger, more expansive game. So we created Plague Inc. Evolved, which went onto PC and has then since gone on to console as well. All just ways to take the existing game and stretch it and spread it as far as possible. It also let me do some slightly non-sensible business things as well. So I ended up making a board game of Plague Inc., which was wonderful fun, but it was more kind of translating the digital mechanics into a physical board game. We sold about 35,000 copies of the board game, so it's an order of magnitude different to the digital stuff. But seeing something real and physical is great, and it gives people an opportunity to play the game with their friends and interact with it in a way that they might not otherwise do. And we've just actually finished an expansion for it, which just finished up on Kickstarter a month ago now. So we're negotiating all the tariffs that people are putting in around the world at the moment to try and work out how to get it over to the US nice and not too expensively. But that, I mean, it's not a sense, I would never, ever recommend anybody makes a board game as a sensible business decision. Like, please do not take that away from this. But it is a lot of fun, and we've had the luxury of being able to do that. And we also just try to keep the game relevant and alive by putting news items in which keep the game feeling fresh. So here's one of our Brexit events, which I actually wrote, two odd years ago, and unfortunately it's just as applicable now as it was 2 years ago. No one really knows what the fuck's going on still. But there we are. But we do these things, and it keeps the game live. It lets people talk about it with their friends. It makes the game feel real. It gets us to the front page of Reddit every now and again. Like these kind of things are very simple and easy to do, actually, compared to making the game, and they have an enormous impact in keeping people aware of what we're doing here. And then after it was about 5 years, I decided, right, I can finally start working on a new game now. I think game designers all have an infinite number of ideas that they want to work on. I know I did, but I couldn't let myself work on them. I thought, with Plague Inc., I have a once-in-a-lifetime chance at sort of this success. Nothing I do is ever going to be as successful as Plague Inc. So I kept on working on those updates and things I said. But then, after 5 years, we kind of felt, okay, I've grown up a bit more of a team around me. We had 7 people then, and I thought, right, now I can start to make this game Rebel Inc., which, as I said at the beginning, is the insurgency simulator. And Rebel Inc. is actually a game I wanted to make before I made Plague Inc., but I didn't. I thought it'd be too complicated to do. And thank God I didn't, because I was right. It was a fucking awfully hard game to make. I spent 2 years making Rebel Inc., and about a lot more money than Plague Inc. cost to make. And it was a very painful development process, just because of the subject matter being a lot more serious. People don't really have a problem with killing everyone in the world with a deadly disease, but this is much more personal, and I wanted to make sure I did it justice. And I'll talk a bit more about balancing that kind of realistic aspect in a little bit. But yes, we made Rebel Inc. It took 2 years to do. It's on mobile devices at the moment, and it's done really well. It came out at the beginning of this year, and we've got 4 million players. So again, nothing like Plague Inc., but it never was going to. And we're currently working at bringing that onto PC and following exactly the same route we've done with Plague Inc. and just trying to keep it live with updates, etc., etc. One thing I will say is that a key part of why it's very hard for us to work out how much. Well, Rebel Inc. has done well in significant part because Plague Inc. is still doing well. If I hadn't had Plague Inc. around, would it have achieved anything like the same level of success? Probably not. The premium game market is brutally. It used to be brutally competitive. Now it's just brutal, as everyone's gone to sort of more the free-to-play side. But we slap from the creator of Plague Inc. across everything and all of the marketing materials, trying to squeeze as much of the Plague Inc. juice onto Rebel Inc. That's a delightful image, isn't it? Anyway, so Rebel Inc. is at the moment we're working on doing the Rebel Inc. stuff, we're working on doing the Plague Inc. stuff as well, and I'm stretched very thin at the moment, which is why we're trying to find a game designer to hire. So if you see all this and you think you could make Plague Inc. and Rebel Inc. style stuff, please do check our careers page out, because I'd be very interested to hear from you. So that's kind of a quick run-through of the games I've made in the company that I've slowly created, and that's sort of the commercial success side of things. But the games that I've made purely by accident have also got they have a high sort of social impact. They are educational. They make people think about these realistic things. And one of the first times I really realized quite what I'd done purely by chance was when Dr. Ali Khan from the CDC got in touch with me, the Centers for Disease Control, and said, "Hey, love Plague Inc. Can you come out to Atlanta and have a chat with us?" So there's me doing presentation a few years ago. Luckily, I'm wearing a different shirt, I think. The reason why they were at CDC were interested was he said, Plague Inc. creates a compelling world that engages the public on serious public health topics. And it does. People who don't necessarily have a specific interest in understanding how disease spreads, they can play Plague Inc. and they can learn about it. They don't think they're learning about it. They're just trying to beat the game, but it educates by accident because they're trying to work out the systems and, I keep on losing, what if I try something different? And all these real-world systems that they interact with, it conveys key issues and mechanisms about infectious disease spreading and why certain diseases mutate more than others, and is a certain disease likely to be a threat to the whole world? How easy is it to wipe out the whole world with a single disease? Very hard, actually. I had to bias the game in favor of the disease. Like, you can easily knock out, say, 30% of the world's population, but getting to 100% is very tricky. You'll all be pleased to know. Going out to the CDC to talk about Plague Inc. was absolutely phenomenal. It was really exciting and interesting because these were all real experts. They knew what they were talking about. I just sat in a room with no trousers on and made a game about it. And it also let us do things like we did a charitable fundraise when Ebola was causing a lot of concern a few years ago. We can sometimes see disease outbreaks in the chart position of Plague Inc. Normally, it's something like if there's a particularly big flu season in somewhere like Japan, we'll see the game go up the charts in Japan. And that's always been very interesting. But when Ebola was causing a lot of concern, it was quite a different feeling, because I like my games to be at the top of the charts because they're great games, not because there's a horrible disease causing a huge amount of suffering. So we did this Ebola is not a game campaign with our players, and we raised $76,000, which I was quite proud of. And you can see here's a quote from someone at the Red Cross about the money that we raised. But it was just really interesting seeing how people were scared about Ebola and they wanted to understand more about it. And one of the things that people seemed to be telling their friends about was, you should check out this Plague Inc. game and it will help you. I mean, will it help you understand more about disease, or was it just a morbid curiosity? Who knows? But we had a lot of people get in touch with us and say that this reassured them a little bit, because they created an Ebola-like disease in the game and it didn't spread around the world and kill everybody because the symptoms are too severe. And it just helped give people context to a real-world situation that they didn't really understand before. And we also see Plague Inc. just being used in education a lot. It gets used by teachers and lecturers and healthcare professionals. And I think Plague Inc. isn't there to teach all of the subject matter. Where Plague Inc. and where games like Plague Inc. can be useful is it helps reinforce concepts that people have learned. It helps introduce people to various topics, and it helps people think about what they've learned. And one of the best ways I see people using Plague Inc. in education is actually to talk about where Plague Inc. gets it wrong. Where is the model not correct? Where's the difference between reality and the game mode? And one of the big things we've done is we've said that as soon as the disease evolves a symptom or mutates a symptom, it applies to everyone all across the world. Obviously completely inaccurate. And yet having that kind of discussion helps people develop their own learning more than they would do otherwise. Rebel Inc. is also beginning to have a similar impact to Plague Inc. This is me talking to the World Bank's Global Lead for Stability, Peace and Security at a major peace and security conference in Stockholm last month. And Laura says that Rebel Inc. lets everyone wrestle with the messy challenges of post-conflict recovery and better understand the complex realities of building peace. And again, this was phenomenal for me to come along, because I was sitting in a room here, but most of this was actually me having questions thrown at me by all these peace building and security experts. And it was really, it was brilliant to hear, because they were A, engaging with the game I was showing them, B, they thought it was a great idea, and C, they were asking questions. Have you thought about this? How do you reflect women's rights in the game? How do you deal with the fact that some people think that a Western government is just coming in and fixing everything? And all of these topics and issues are things that we'd thought about and factored into our algorithms and models. So it was again fantastic, and we're actually currently working with the World Bank on if we can develop a a training use for Rebelling? Is there a way that they can incorporate this into some of their training programs? And if we, I mean, for me, it's fantastic to hear examples of where my games are being used to do real good stuff, because I made a game for people to have fun, and so seeing experts sort of put that stamp of validity on is wonderful. So that's kind of the broad social impact side of the games. And now I thought I'd just take a little bit of time to talk about the lessons that I very much tried to live by while making Rebelling, and which I would recommend to anybody making a game that's educational or they want to have a social impact. And the biggest thing is make a fun game. I think all too often people let the desire to make an educational game or a social impact game crowd out the fact that it's a game. It has to be a game still, and you can have the most wonderfully educational game in the world, but if it's not fun, if people don't play it, it's not going to do anything. Like, there's all sorts of stories of people having huge grants and budgets spent on making educational games which are very impressive and look great, but nobody plays them and they don't have that impact. And I think you always, if you are making a social impact game, it has to be a game. You have to find the fun. And with Rebelling, that was something which I was constantly having to try and make sure, is it fun? Is it good to play? What's the core game mechanism? And Rebelling was actually the moving soldiers around in a kind of a cat and mouse game with the insurgents. That was kind of the initial gameplay mechanism that everything grew out of. But I cannot emphasize enough how the vast majority of social impact games do not do this, and it's entirely understandable why not. Because if you've got someone who's giving you a grant to make something, and they say, well, it's got to have these 50 things in, which are all really important, and I'm not giving you the money unless you do it, you're going to put it in. But and it's the same thing with the CDC. They wanted to understand a bit about how better to communicate. They have these experts who are so knowledgeable, and yet they turn the fire hydrant of knowledge on, and they just sort of splatter people against the wall because the average person doesn't have that level of knowledge. And you've really got to, I think I've got it on the next slide, yes. You've really got to work on what you actually need to communicate. So I think you can't communicate everything to people in a game and still have it be fun. You've got to simplify down what you're trying to communicate and work and select really what you want to get across. And I think a key part of this is deciding where to focus, where to not focus, where will you exaggerate certain concepts and where will you ignore other concepts. And I think for me it's always a concept of finding the core truth. Like, sometimes you even have to get things wrong to help people understand the truth better than the truth actually would. And it's a bit confusing to get your head around that. But here we have a very low resolution image of the London tube map. And the London tube map that everybody knows is not actually geographically accurate. People they tried a geographically accurate one, and people didn't understand it. It didn't communicate the information that it needed to. So they went for this one instead, which is not geographically accurate, and yet it helps people understand the geography of the tube maps, tube stations, better than the real thing did. And that's something which really drives a lot of the game design decisions I make, is that what matters is what players take away from it, not whether what you're saying is actually true or not. So it's about exaggerating and simplifying and focusing to get that core truth. And this is where you need, if you are working with backers on making a game or funders, or you are an expert yourself, you need to be so careful on this. You cannot just, you've got to focus on that accessibility. The games I try to make are accessible, and sacrifices have to be made. I had a big long list of things I wanted to get across in Rebelling, and some of them didn't make it. Tribal dynamics between different tribes didn't get into the game. Opium and drug smuggling, that I am actually hoping to get in an expansion. But there were various things which I had to cut, and it doesn't take away from the game. It makes the game, because people can understand it. People can engage with it. It's better that you can communicate 50% of the truth to people than make a game that has 100% of the truth, which nobody touches or plays. So really, really important, this. Educate by accident. Yeah, I've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but my games are based on reality as much as I can do it, and that's why I'm here talking to you today. I didn't sit down wanting to make an educational game, but because I made a game on real issues, real mechanisms, you can't play it and not be educated by it. Like, it's amazing how forcing yourself through the real world restrictions just has that impact. People want to win the game, people will engage with the mechanisms, people will think about it, people will try and apply knowledge they've learned elsewhere to the game that they're playing. We have people email in saying that they couldn't beat it, but they went and had a chat to their sister who's a doctor, and they got some tips about, oh, maybe don't make everyone's head explode straight away. Maybe try and be a bit subtle at first, and then your disease can spread around on aeroplanes and then make their heads explode. And it worked, and you got people just applying that real-world knowledge. No diseases really do that, luckily. And also, using real data, I mean, it opens up opportunities to have things like the CDC or like the World Bank reach out to me in Stockholm, but it also can make design a bit easier because you haven't got to come up with random mechanisms. You can rely on people's existing knowledge. Like, people know that diseases can kill people, so that's something you don't have to explain to people. People know that governments are going to try and shut down airplanes to stop disease. All these things that you can not have to worry about communicating to people because you have existing knowledge that you can use. And even things like you can scan newspapers and think, ooh, this happened this happened in a pandemic film, so I'm going to take that event and I'm going to make sure I've captured it in the game. I spoke to lots of people when I was making Rebel Inc, and we got personal vignettes of times when people were in Afghanistan and a certain thing happened to them, and we translate that into a decision in the game. There's a lot of material you can mine to put into your game, which makes the game better, makes it more realistic, and it means you don't have to make something up completely randomly. And there's also real data sets. So Plague Inc. makes heavy use of the World Development Indicators from the World Bank, actually. I mean, the data there is ridiculous. So, like, this is where it says that Andorra has 535 tractors in use for agriculture, excluding garden tractors. And you can track this for the last 40 years in the World Development Indicators. So I would recommend anybody wanting data about real-world countries, definitely check out those. And again, it makes it a bit easier. I didn't have to run around Wikipedia adding up different country populations. I could just pull it from these data sets. So there are a lot of advantages to using real-world data. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of problems for using real-world data and issues. And I've kind of mentioned it already. Plague Inc. wasn't too much of an issue. We focus on we take a very high-level view of things. We don't focus on stories of individual suffering. But with Rebel Inc., it was a much more personal. It felt a lot more personal. It's an ongoing situation. It's inspired by ongoing situations. And so, trying to balance making a game about something whilst also having it be real enough, but not so real that it seems to be exploiting or minimizing suffering, and it was really quite hard, and it was a big concern for us as a company that we could find a way to do this in a respectful and realistic manner. And we did it through lots of research, lots of talking to people, and I was actually really, I spoke to a huge number of people who live in Afghanistan or who've fled Afghanistan or who've worked in Afghanistan for a long time, and there was an incredibly positive response. People wanted to see a game being made about it because otherwise people aren't talking about it at all. And it was a very, very supportive, but we still had to always be so careful that we weren't crossing. There's a line somewhere between where it goes from being a good thing to make a game about to exploiting, and it was just, you have to be very careful with it. And for us, the fact that we've got such a high-level view of the world, we never zoom, you never see an individual person, there's never any blood showing, we're not showing you having battles and stuff, that makes it a lot easier for us, but it's the flip side of using real-world data, is that you need to be very careful about that. And that's me done, 1 minute ahead of schedule. I think this is our company at the moment. We're all actually based in the UK, but that just makes a cool graphic, and we can add bubbles on as other people join us. But yeah, I mean, if you've got a game which you think would fit with Plague Inc. and Rebel Inc., please let me know. I'm always looking out for games which have a similar kind of realistic and intelligent strategy simulation focus, so definitely let me know. And check out our careers page if you think that you are the game designer of my dreams that I've been looking for the last year. I'm quite specific in what I want, but do have a look. And I'm in New York tomorrow for a bit, so you can send me a random email in case we can have a chat. We could probably do a question. I don't know if we want to. Do you want to do questions, or do you want to get out of here? What are people's thoughts? Anyone got any questions? Okay, you need to go down to the microphone. You've got to do a walk of shame. I bet you wish you hadn't put your hand up now. There's one there as well, actually.
So obviously a virus can't play Plague Inc., but potential insurgents can play Rebel Inc. Have you thought at all about what sort of outcomes you want for someone considering joining an insurgency if they spend time with the game, and you know, where would they end up in your dreams?
So, because we focus, the insurgents are the opposition in Rebel Inc. So I think what people playing would probably more likely get is an understanding of how it's such a murky, grey, complicated issue without any positive. There's no like easy solutions. I mean, I do actually get a similar question with Plague Inc., which is, what if you're training bioterrorists to like develop a disease? And my answer to that's actually more easy, which is if somebody is going to be a bioterrorist and try and kill everybody, I hope they are using my game rather than studying at university, because at the end, lots of sacrifices have to be made in order to fit it into a game shape.
I'm wondering if you can speak to a bit more of your experience in transitioning into the board game component of it, as well as the process of working with Kickstarter.
So making the board game was really fun. Like, it's very challenging. Going from I've got thousands of lines of algorithm which handle the simulations. So trying to crunch it down into a physical form, which you can't ask players to do division. You can only have it. I wanted to make it accessible. It was basically spending a year of kind of headbanging on a table again and trying to work it out and try and make it. Well, I'm being told off. And you said you weren't going to tell me off. And try and make it so that it can be accessible. There's lots of iteration. Working with Kickstarter is great. I mean, Luke was floating around earlier on. Really nice guy. Kickstarter are definitely great at nurturing that community. Very good for board games. I'd be more concerned about it for video games, though. So that's it. I've got the red light flashing, and they're going to escort me off. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll be floating around if anyone's got any more questions.